Greetings, friends of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and welcome to another presentation on the really critical topic of the investigative judgment and how we can defend us against attacks from enemies within and without. Now, we've recently done a video exposing the attack or the false doctrines of Desmond Ford, and this erupted a lot of discussion and controversy. So we followed up with another video, a short Bible study, how to defend the investigative judgment and the 2,300 days. But people are still interested in more of the details. So what we're going to do today is look at a verse-by-verse study of Daniel chapter 8. This is really the central focus of attention, is what's going on in Daniel 8 and the cleansing of the sanctuary at the end of the 2,300 days. And the key to this is to understand what it is that this exceeding great horn tramples down two truths, the truth of the daily and the sanctuary. And this is where even most Adventist teachers and theologians are incapable of defending the investigative judgment as best they can, because they don't understand what the daily is. And the misinterpretation of that is what fuels the fire of the preterists who are attacking the investigative judgment. So our purpose today is to break this down and show that this thing has to have a fulfillment, Daniel 8, in the New Testament era. And it cannot be fulfilled by Antiochus Epiphanes 200 or so years before Christ came on the scene of action. So that will be our purpose today. It'll be a little bit lengthy, hopefully under an hour. So please come on in and join us as we break the bread of life and get down to the bottom of how we understand the sealed book of Daniel that's been opened up to us in the latter days. So we'll go here to a PowerPoint presentation. This, once again, is a production of upa7.org, and we're going to really ask the question, would you consume bread baked over dung coming from this man? And of course, that's Desmond Ford. And a bread baked over dung in the Bible is referring to false doctrine. Or are we going to trust inspired in explanation based on this chart and to understand the daily and the sanctuary in a very simple way? So we're going to make this very clear how to understand what the daily and the sanctuary is in Daniel 8, because this is the key to understanding and defending the investigative judgment. So Daniel chapter 8, that's our focus. We're going to break it down verse by verse, focusing in on the daily and the sanctuary, the truth and the host that was trodden down. So we're going to come to understand what has happened in the fulfillment of these prophecies. So why is it so critical to understand the daily and the sanctuary that are trampled down? Because without this, you're going to be wandering off into dark paths and total confusion. And that's where everybody falls short. So we're going to zoom in on that today, that understanding what the daily and the sanctuary are that were trodden underfoot. And what is this exceeding great horn that does it, and when did it arise? So we're going to look at the proof of that and address that question. And when does the truth of the daily and the sanctuary actually return? Because they were trodden underfoot, God brought them back, understanding these things at the appropriate time. So we're going to learn how this all fits together in a more thorough defense of the investigative judgment by going through Daniel 8 verse by verse. So we'll begin with this text for meditation, and I encourage you to kneel down and pray and invite the Holy Spirit to guide, lead, and direct you to unto all truth as we go into our study. So here's our text. Comes from the writings of Ellen White. Now, a lot of people are prejudiced against hers, but nonetheless, the statement stands. A book called Testimonies to Ministers, page 114, talking about the importance of studying the books of Daniel and Revelation. It reads, "Let us give more time to the study of the Bible." We can all agree on that. "We do not understand the word as we should. the book of Revelation opens with an injunction to us to understand the instruction that it contains. Blessed is he that readeth, and they that hear the words of this prophecy. God declares, and keep those things which are written therein, for the time is at hand. When we as a people understand what this book means to us, there will be seen among us a great revival. We do not fully understand the lessons that it teaches, notwithstanding the injunction given to us to search and study it. In the past, teachers have declared that Daniel and the Revelation have been to be sealed books, and the people have turned from them. The veil, whose apparent mystery has kept many from lifting it, God's own hand has withdrawn from these portions of his word. And of course, this began to really unfold in the early 19th century, around 1833, leading up to the rise of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So the books of Daniel and Revelation, the prophecies that have been considered mysteries for the most of Christianity for centuries, have been unveiled or opened up. And so this is an important thing to understand, these lessons that's teach, and especially for Seventh-day Adventists, because we ourselves have not fully understand the history of our fundamental doctrines, how they arose, and how to understand their application to the time we live today in a very troubled world. So these mysteries are not locked up forever. And now is the time of all times that we should be looking for greater light to understand the sealed things in the book of Daniel and its connection with Revelation. So that's what we'll be doing today. Now, we're going to break this down verse by verse. So these are the first 7 verses in Daniel 8, verses 1 to 7. So we'll just read through this and highlight a few key things. So it reads, In the 3rd year of the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar, a vision appeared unto me, that is Daniel, even unto me, Daniel, after which it appeared unto me at the first. Verse 2, And I saw in a vision, and it came to pass, when I saw that it was at Shushan in the palace, which is in the province of Elam, and I saw in a vision, and was by the river Ulai. Then I lifted up my eyes, and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram, which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. Verse 4, And I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no beast might stand before him. Neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand, but he did according to his will, and became great. Verse 5, And I was considering, and behold, an he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. Verse 6, And he came to the ram which had the 2 horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran into him in the fury of his power. Verse 7, And I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler against him, and smote the ram, and brake his 2 horns, and there was no power in the ram to stand before him. But he cast him down to the ground, and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. So we see here, Daniel was given a vision. And in the vision, he described a ram that rose up with 2 horns, one higher than the other. Then after that came a he-goat, moving rapidly over the ground with a notable horn that smites this ram and destroys it. So what's going on here? Well, it's important to understand that these beasts are symbols of powers, world powers that existed. And we're going to see how this helps us unlock the prophecy. The Bible interprets itself. We cannot rely on uninspired, interpreted opinions of men, no matter how educated they are. But we have to let the Bible explain itself. So that's what we're going to do here. Now, this illustration is exceedingly powerful because it gives us an overview in the sweep of time of Daniel chapter 8. And so we're going to be focusing in on elements of this, actually in a separate video. So it's going to take 2 parts. But let's just do a quick review. Over here, up on the top, you have Babylon, represented by a lion with two wings. And this is in Daniel chapter 7, verse 4. And an important thing to recognize is this is parallel with a vision in Daniel 2, showing the history of the world in the vision of the metal man, head of gold, chest of silver, waist of brass, and 2 legs of iron, down to the time of the 10 toes. So this parallels. Daniel 7, 8, and 2 all parallel with each other. So this is how we can correlate and confirm what is true. So after the ancient Babylon, Empire of Babylon, Daniel prophesied that would come to an end, came the next world empire, and this is confirmed in history, which is the Medo-Persian Empire. Daniel chapter 8, verse 20, and we're going to see the proof of that, but that is that ram with the 2 horns, one higher than the other, represented Medo-Persia. And then after that, this goat comes with the notable horn and smites it. That's the Grecian Empire. And then that horn gets cut off, and then you have 4 horns rise up on the goat. And this brings us up to the left-hand side, AD 31, the cross or crucifixion. And we go into the New Testament era, and this is where we see the rise of this exceeding great horn that tramples down the truth of the daily and the sanctuary. So this is what we're going to zoom in on. This is just a pictorial representation of the prophecy, and we're going to use this as a visual guide to understanding what's going on. There's a lot more in here, and we'll be breaking this down as we move forward. So what's the ram represent? So let the Bible interpret itself. In verse 20, Daniel 8, verse 20 says, the ram which thou sawest having 2 horns are the kings of Medo and Persia. So that's irrefutable. That ram is a representation of the Medo-Persian Empire. What about the little horn of Daniel 7, verse 8 and 8, verse 9? Now here's an illustration. In Daniel 7, this horn speaks great things against God. Horn head rises up and plucks out 3 horns. So that power has traditionally been identified by Protestants as the papacy. Now, it depends on how you look at prophecy. There's 3 different schools of thought. We discussed this in the video where we exposed Desmond Ford, who's really a preterist. Preterists apply all of this to Antiochus Epiphanes in the 2nd century BC. And they're the ones that are opposing Adventists, who are historicists, the historical view of prophecy, and they apply it to the papal rule of the 1260 years, 538 to 1798. So this is really a battle on how you look at prophecy, which school of prophecy. So Desmond Ford is really a preterist. He attempts to harmonize with historicism, but it doesn't work. But Seventh-day Adventists are historicist. And then the other view that's popular with evangelical Christians is futurism, where they rely heavily on John Darby and the Scofield Bible, and they apply the little horn to the Antichrist that will enter Jerusalem sometime in the future. So this is really the core of the battle, is which method do we interpret prophecy? And the accurate one is historicism, as held by Seventh-day Adventists. So let's break this down in more detail. The Bible is not putting these things in here by happen chance. So we asked first the question, that ram had 2 horns, but one of them is bigger than the other. What's the meaning of the 2 horns? It's not there by accident. There's a meaning conveyed in this. And so horns in the Bible represent civil powers or governments. That's always the case. In verse 20 in Daniel 8 explains that the horns of the ram were symbolical of the kings of Medo-Persia, denoting its civil leadership or government. Okay, so this is an irrefutable fact. So the one horn being higher than the other would indicate that one part of the civil government was stronger than the other. It's obvious implication here. Then it came up later. So history, you can confirm this in encyclopedias and books of history, tells us that the Persians became stronger than the Mede counterpart. when Cyrus defeated Astyages of Media in the 6th century BC. This is all recorded history. So eventually the whole kingdom became known as Persia. So history collaborates or confirms what Daniel saw in vision. And this is how prophecy, we confirm prophecy. It works together with facts of history. Now we get to the goat. The next empire on the world scene was a goat representing a symbol of a succeeding universal world empire of Greece. And it's known in history that Greece succeeded the Persian Empire. And the notable horn represents its first great king, our leader, Alexander the Great, who successfully molded the Grecian tribes into a world empire. And students of history all know that. Greece before Alexander was kind of scattered group of nomadic tribes, but they came together as this world power, conquering power, that overthrew the Persian Empire. And of course, here's a statue illustrating the young King Alexander in his great conquest as a general and a leader of the Grecian Empire. Furthermore, why does the Bible represent the Persians by a ram and Greece by a goat? It's not an accident. There's a reason, and here's why. In the Bible, a ram is more indicative of a believer and the goat of an unbeliever, such is the case in Matthew 25, verse 33, where Christ placed the sheep on his right hand representing the faithful and the goats on the left representing the unfaithful. You can also go to John chapter 10, verses 11 to 16, where the righteous are likened to sheep. Okay, it fits. So we look at the character. The kings of the Medo-Persia were considered more spiritual or sheep-like than the Grecian ones. And here are the facts. Cyrus the Great accepted the faith of the true God, freed the Jews from the Babylonian captivity, and allowed them to rebuild their temple. This is found in the book of Ezra, chapter 1, verses 1 to 3. Darius, a successor of Cyrus, in Ezra chapter 6, verses 1 to 14, also believed in God and helped God's people to complete the building of the temple. And that's recorded in Ezra 6, verses 8 to 12. And Xerxes the Great, or Ahasuerus, married Esther, a Jewess, and averted the genocide of the Jewish race. And that's all in the book of Esther. So the Medes had much more favor or spiritual nature favorable to the true God of heaven. So this is recorded, and the ram would be a fitting symbol of that. The Greeks, in contrast, with all their natural philosophy and reasoning, on the other hand, as a nation, were strictly pagan and bore no record of spirituality, so it's more fitting to identify them as goats. The Bible's symbols are unmistakable. The details reveal to us something, the exactness by which God put together the scriptures in showing this vision to Daniel. The details really confirm to us that God is indeed showing us special truths that fit perfectly. Now, the fall of the Medo-Persian Empire at Ram. The goat moved with choler, which means anger, and breaking the ram's horns and stamped upon it portrays the fall of the Persian Empire to Greece under the leadership of Alexander, the notable horn. According to history, this took place in a series of key battles between the two nations from approximately 334 to 323 BC. So you can confirm that in secular history. With the fall of the Medo-Persia, Greece became a universal empire and the most extensive of any previous empire, causing Greek culture to spread and dominate in the world. And one of the things we get out of Greek culture, of course, anybody goes to college gets exposed to the Greek philosophers, Plato and so forth. So it's their educational system based on humanism, exalting human wisdom above the divine. So that influence is still impacting us today in our educational system. Now we're going to move on to verse 8, the breaking of the great horn and the rise of four notable ones. So this is depicting events that took place in history. So here's the verse. Daniel 8, verse 8, it says, "Therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and for it came up four notable ones toward the four winds of heaven." So what's going on here? Well, the goat Greece became very great, but when the great horn, or Alexander, was strong, it broke. He died. He actually died young. Like after a drunken rampage, he died about the age of 32. So what happened? So in 323 BC, Alexander the Great died at the age of 32 from a severe fever after a drinking binge. Since Alexander did not have any posterity, or sons, his kingdom was divided among his four generals, Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy. And this is all recorded facts of history. We can go to this map that comes from a history book, actually, that shows the four divisions of Alexander's empire around 301 BC. And you can see the areas mapped out by, in the south, Ptolemy, in the north, Seleucus, and then the two minor kingdoms of Cassander and Lysimachus that were later absorbed by the Seleucian Empire. So this is the type of illustrations you can get from history books. We go to verse 9, Daniel 8, verse 9, it says, out of one of them, out of one of those four horns came forth a little horn which waxed exceeding great towards the south, toward the east, and towards the pleasant land. So now we got another horn arising after the four divisions of the Grecian Empire. So the exceeding great horn would have to be a nation greater than Greece, since it came out of one of the four notable horns, not one of the four horns expanding. So the idea that Antiochus Epiphanes fulfills this is just absolutely nonsense. So it has to be another world empire after Greece. Moreover, the title exceeding great, in contrast to the title great, denotes a greater kingdom than Alexander's. History bears out that the only power that the exceeding great horn could represent is Rome. And that's confirmed in the vision of Daniel 2. The Grecian Empire, the brass of waste, was followed by the two legs of iron. So we have collaboration here. So the universal extent of Rome is further proven by the fact that the exceeding great horn conquered in all directions. The Bible says it came from the north because it went south first, then east, and then west towards the pleasant land. And we have to know, what is the pleasant land? Well, go look it up in Psalms 106:24. This is Palestine. This has always been the territory of dispute, of interest, is who lays claim to the promised land, the promise given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that bears fruit today in modern political, geopolitical controversies around the Middle East, is who lays claim to the Abrahamic promises. And that's a whole topic of another study we'll have in future videos. So this is showing the conquest and the rise of the Roman Empire that went in all directions. And you can see this on maps. It became even bigger than the Grecian Empire. So the exceeding great horn, Rome, persecutes Christians. And we go to Daniel 8, verse 10, and this is how we can identify that it's in the New Testament era. And it, referring to that exceeding great horn, waxed great even to the host of heaven. And it cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground and stamped upon him. So what's the host of heaven here? This is the key word. The exceeding great horn in verse 10 must symbolize pagan Rome, who persecuted or cast down and stamped the Christians, the host of heaven, those that believed in Jesus. The host could not be the Jewish nation, since they had killed the prophets And you can see this in Matthew 23, verses 37 and 38. They killed all the prophets, rejected the gospel, and persecuted Christians after Christ's crucifixion. Thus, they could not be termed the host of heaven. They were no longer God's chosen people. They chose Barabbas and rejected Christ, and they were under a perpetual curse to the end of time. So this is the only logical fit, the host of heaven representing Christians that were persecuted by pagan Rome. And this is all recorded, millions of them persecuted and fed to lions and thrown in the Colosseum. So this is all recorded history. The stars have a specific reference to the apostles, who are distinguished from regular Christians, which are known as the host of heaven. They are like stars on the crown of the woman in Revelation 12:1. That woman God's true church has 12 stars in the crown. Note that the stars of Revelation 12 represent God's government or leaders throughout time, starting with the 12 patriarchs and the 12 tribes of the Old Testament. But in the New Testament era, the 12 stars were the 12 apostles. And then eventually, in the end of time, we'll get 12,000 from 12 tribes, 144,000. So this is a representation of God's government, 12. So the stars are the apostles that arose in the early Christian church. Moving on to verse 11. The exceeding great horn persecutes Christians. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. So here's the key words. The daily was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary cast down. So this exceeding great horn, Rome cast down these two truths from the Bible. Now notice, I did not mention the word sacrifice. It's in brackets because it's added by translators. It doesn't belong to the text. We're going to see how this really is critical to understanding what the daily represents. Nobody understands it because they all think the word sacrifice refers to sacrifices in the Old Testament era, and it is not logical. It's not biblical. So we're going to break this down further. So the exceeding great horn magnified himself to the Prince of Hosts, that is, Christ being the Prince of Hosts, or the head of Christians, of course. He is our King and Savior and Lord. Thus, the exceeding great horn in verse 11 has to be papal Rome, who magnified himself and claimed to be God on earth, or the vicar of heaven. Therefore, he is the same as the little horn in Daniel 7, verse 25. Papal Rome, who rose up and spoke great things against God, thinking to change times and laws. So this is the work of papal Rome. They're the same power. The place of his sanctuary must be speaking about the work of Christ's administration in the heavenly sanctuary. And this is where most Christians have no idea what Jesus is doing up in heaven after he ascended. He serves as our great high priest. So we got to focus on this sanctuary in heaven. And what did the popes do? Well, they tried to supplant Christ's place as high priest by claiming to be God's vicar. That's what the popes claim. They claim to be Christ's representative on earth, and that one must confess their sins to what? Mere mortals, priests, instead of Christ, and forbid people from praying directly to Christ. That was the origin that Luther protested and nailed 95 theses to the wall, is the idea righteousness comes by faith, by confessing your sins to Jesus, our high priest, rather than to a mere mortal. So this is a gross error of the papacy, supplanting Christ's true ministry and role as the priest of the sanctuary in heaven with a pagan priesthood. Baptized paganism, if you will. So this is how we can prove that the place of his sanctuary is when Christ entered into the holy place after his ascension, the sanctuary which is in heaven, not on earth. So the terms, the daily and the sanctuary, are crucial, and we're going to look more into this because they're mentioned both in Daniel 8, verses 11 and 12. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him, this great exceeding power, the daily was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary is cast down. Verse 12, and an host was given him against the daily by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and practiced and prospered. So what they're trying to do is erase this understanding of Jesus as the great high priest, the antitypical high priest that ministers in the sanctuary, which is in heaven, not on earth. The earthly sanctuary in the Old Testament was given to Moses was a type or a model. And most Christians don't understand that the work of Christ in the temple or the sanctuary, which is in heaven. And this is crucial to understanding what Daniel was shown in chapter 8 here, in this vision. So the truth of the daily and the sanctuary being cast down to the ground by none other than the papacy. So we come back to our illustration here. After the cross on the left hand side, AD 31, we see two truths trampled down by this exceeding great horn. And those truths have been from the beginning, from Abel back the altar of true worship versus Cain and his offering on the altar of brick, the altar of false worship. So you've got these competing systems, and the truth of the Sabbath and the sanctuary was what Rome trampled underfoot and exalted in its place a pagan counterfeit. Sunday, a day of sun worship, and then the pagan priesthood, confessing your sins to a mere priest or a mortal man. So those are the truths that were trampled underfoot by this exceeding great horn. So let's really dig in. What is the daily? Well, this is the key, and this is where even most Christians are in total darkness, especially the preterists. They think that the word sacrifice is evening and morning sacrifices. Well, the word is added by translators. It doesn't belong. So biblically, it should read only daily, because the word sacrifice was supplied by translators, and this is obvious. It's well known. That's why it's italicized in your Bible. Now, Ellen White has a statement in her writings, early writings, that confirms this. It doesn't belong to the text. Now, people will dismiss her, but basic translators understand this. So if you take the word sacrifice out, they put it in by human wisdom, but if you take it out, then we got to deal with the word daily. And if that means something different, then it changes our whole trajectory on how we understand what's going on in this chapter. So daily in the sanctuary must be of the truth that was cast down to the ground, verse 12. It can't be error. So thus both the daily and the sanctuary must represent doctrines of truth trodden down by papal Rome. This is absolutely irrefutable. So what did Rome do? So since, however, the English language does not have an exact equivalent of the Hebrew word for daily, okay, if you go to the concordance and you claim to be an expert in Hebrew, the word is rendered variously as continual or perpetual or everlasting. Since none of these terms are exactly synonymous, but have many individual connotations, they must be taken together as a compound word. So direct translation of certain Hebrew words into English is not so easy. But this one, if you take the composite whole, the Sabbath is the only doctrine in the Christian era that fits. Think about this. Pay attention. It is a continual or perpetual and everlasting, but it's pertaining to a day, from time immemorial to time eternal. And this gets into the whole controversy of the true day of worship. Jesus was a Sabbath keeper. The Sabbath has never changed. It's part of the Ten Commandments law. Remember the Sabbath day. Of course, it's been replaced or supplanted by a pagan day of sun worship, Sunday, and that was done by Rome, freely admitted by the Catholic Church. This is not a secret. The evidence is overwhelming. So the daily represents a true doctrine that was cast underfoot. It's the 7-day Sabbath. And friends, this is the key to unlock that. Even Adventist theologians are all divided on the issue of the daily. It's a big controversy in the Adventist church, and for that reason, they cannot adequately defend investigative judgment. That's why we're here, and we'll tell you where we get all this from at the end of this video, so please be patient. We'll give you the source material. So the Sabbath was a key doctrine trampled underfoot by the papacy, and it's an absolute fact, and this is the key how to unlock and defend that this investigative judgment and all of these things take place in the New Testament era. So what is meant by the sanctuary? Okay, the sanctuary is also one of the truths trampled underfoot by the papacy. It could not have been a heathen temple or sanctuary because this one was polluted. An abomination was put in its place, and you can correlate with that with Daniel 11, verse 31. Now, Daniel 11 is a whole nother study on king of the north, king of the south. And the king of the north there in verse 31 also places this abomination desolation. That's also identifying the papacy, the Roman power. Now, we have a separate video on the king of the north and king of the south, the successive rulers over the promised land. And you can check a link in the description box below to follow that one. It directly parallels or collaborates what we're teaching here in Daniel 8. And this is another one. The Adventist church leaders are all divided on king of the north and king of the south, and none of them got it right. So this is key to tying these things together. So back to the point, the sanctuary cannot be a heathen temple because they've always been polluted. So you cannot pollute a temple or an institution which is already unclean. Pagan temples have always been unclean, but you can pollute a true one. Thus, like the Sabbath, the papacy perverted the truth of the sanctuary doctrine. They put a pagan counterfeit in its place. So this sanctuary is related to Christ's administration because the exceeding great horn, or the papacy, magnified himself against who? The Prince of Hosts, against Christ himself, and tried to cast down the place of his, that is, Christ's sanctuary. And that sanctuary and his work takes place not on earth, but in heaven. Thus, the sanctuary here would have to represent the heavenly temple wherein Christ intercedes on our behalf, where he's been carrying out work ever since the ascension in the holy place, and then in 1844 he went from the holy to the most holy. This is why it's so crucial to understand the 2,300 days, which is part of this chapter. So thus, the sanctuary, or place of a sanctuary, has a reference to the truth of the sanctuary in Christ's administration in the heavenly temple. This is the only thing that fits logically. This is what the vision in the sealed book of Daniel is now showing to us clearly. So the truth will be restored at the end of the 2,300 days. Now we're going to go through Daniel 8, verses 13 to 19. Now some of this will be covered in more detail about the 2,300 days, a day for a year, and so forth. We'll do that in a separate video. But here, let's read these verses. It said, Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto a certain saint which spake, How long shall the vision concerning the daily and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot? So the question is asked, and the answer is verse 14. And he said unto me, Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. Not an earthly sanctuary, but the one in heaven. And it came to pass, when I, even I, Daniel, had seen the vision and sought for the meaning, then beheld there stood before me as an appearance of a man. Verse 16. And I heard the man's voice between the banks of Ulai, which called and said, Gabriel, make this man to understand the vision. Verse 17. So he came near where I stood, and when he came I was afraid, and I fell upon my face. And he said unto me, Understand, O Son of Man, for at the time of the end shall be the vision. Verse 18. Now, as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep on my face toward the ground, but he touched me and set me upright. Verse 19. And he said, Behold, I will make thee known what shall be in the last end of the indignation, for at the time appointed the end shall be. So the whole secret to unlocking the 2,300 days When shall the sanctuary be cleansed? What's going on? Where does it take place? Will be at the time of the end. The book of Daniel has been a sealed book for centuries. Most people have closed it and said, we can't understand it. They discourage their people investigating. But why is it in the Bible? Well, it's unlocked at the time of the end, the days we live now. So now, of all times, we should be expecting to understand the vision given to Daniel. Daniel didn't understand it in his day. But now, through inspiration, God has opened the door for us to understand that through latter-day prophets. So we're going to learn more about that. But this is the key. It cannot be through uninspired preterist commentaries who try to place it in the past. It's illogical. They're uninspired commentators, and they should be rejected. They don't have the truth. So moving on, verse 20 and 21, it just simply interprets the meaning of the goat and the ram. This is the ram which thou sawest, having two horns, are the kings of Medo Persia, verse 21, and the rough goat is the king of Greece, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. So this is irrefutable, identifying what we've already covered, that the ram being Medo Persian Empire, and the goat representing the Grecian Empire, the notable horn being the first king, of course, Alexander the Great. So this is absolute confirmation. The Bible interprets itself and confirms what history shows us. So with that reliable guide, we can safely trust that the rest of the vision going on into the future is biblically correct and certain, that we can stand on the rock of truth. So moving on, Daniel 8 verses 22 and 23, we transition here from Greece to Rome. And here it is. It reads, and now that being broken, whereas four stood up for it, four kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. Verse 23. And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. So these terms, highlighted in red, are absolutely crucial to understand the time setting here. And these are interpreted through inspiration. I will give you the source at the end of the video, so please stay tuned. So being broken represents Alexander's early demise. Okay, we've covered that. Four stood up. Of course, the four successors or generals that divided up the Grecian Empire. We've covered that, but not in his power. So he didn't have a son to succeed him. So not in his posterity. So something else comes that's not part of that lineage. In the latter time of their kingdom, that phrase is referring to four generals, literally hundreds of years later. If you look at the Daniel 11, I made a reference to that before. We have a video. The king of the north and the king of the south, the successive rulers over the promised land, this took a period of time. So the Ptolemaic and Seleucid empires coalesced and were the beginning of the king of the north and king of the south. So you have to understand Daniel 8 to more fully understand that these powers, these generals, spanned a period of time, literally hundreds of years. So that's what it means in the latter time of the kingdom, towards the end of the Seleucid Empire. The transgressors, of course, of God's law was the Jewish nation that opposed Christ when he showed up on the scene of action. And the full, okay, that means their transgression, their cup was filled to the full, is after they crucified Christ, chose Barabbas and rejected Christ, and had him crucified, their probation closed. And you can compare that in Daniel 7 verse 24. So the transgressors that come to the full is the Jewish nation that was rejected after they chose Barabbas and rejected Christ. And this is where evangelicals, they still think they're God's chosen people. No, they're not. They're the nation not desired. We have a video on that. I'll check the link in the description box below. They don't even know how to identify the modern nation state of Israel that was established in 1948. Well, the answer is, it's in the book of Zephaniah, the nation not desired. So if you're interested in that, you can check the link in the description box below. Now we have this king of a fierce countenance. And this is Rome, especially papal Rome. And Daniel 7 describes it as a nondescript beast, thrashing and desecrating, especially Christians. So a king of fierce countenance shows the rise of papal Rome. And understanding dark sentences, this shows the supernatural power coming from Satan. Dark doctrines, and of course the doctrines of the Catholic Church, transubstantiation, Mariology, pagan priesthood, Sunday worship, and so forth, are dark sentences. They're inspired from underneath. They're not biblical. So what are the characteristics of the Roman power? This is found in verses 24 and 25. Daniel 8 said, "And his power shall be mighty, but not his own power, and he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper in practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people." Verse 25. "And through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes, but shall be broken without hand." So these phrases and words in red are the key. An inspiration unlocks us, and so we'll break these down. His power shall be mighty. So it shows that papal Rome shall have great power and be strong, and especially during the Dark Ages when the papacy ruled over the sovereign kings of Europe. This is all recorded history. But not by his own power. Of course, he's going to be empowered by the counterfeit of Christ, Satan himself. They'll destroy wonderfully and prosper, showing the papacy persecuting the true Christians, especially the Waldenses, the Huguenots, during the Dark Ages. And this is all history. He shall cause craft to prosper. Okay, the term craft is papacy used deception, operating under a garb of Christian, professing to be a Christian entity, but it really is baptized Christianity. True Protestants recognize this, as this is the use of craft or craftiness to prosper the cause, the rise of the papal power. The Prince of Princes, of course, Christ himself, and broken without hand, shows that he would be diminished by God's power. And when the Pope at the end of the 1260 years, 1798, was brought captive by Berthier, Napoleon's general, that showed you that the papacy had been greatly diminished by the preaching of God's word, starting with Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation. That's what allowed Rome to be broken without hand, the preaching of the truth of God's word. So, that brings us to the end of the chapter. What can we summarize? We've covered a lot here, and we're going to be deep diving in more detail on more topics such as the day for year principle and some of those time prophecies when these truths came back. That will be a future video, so please stay tuned. Subscribe to this channel so you can be notified when that happens shortly. So this study here reveals to us how the papal Rome trampled down the Sabbath and the sanctuary truths, two critical doctrines to the Christian church. It also revealed how these doctrines survived the Dark Ages and have been restored to God's true followers in the end of time. We're talking about it right now. Now we'll look at some time prophecies in the book of Daniel, the 1260, 1290, and 1335, that will show us exactly when these two truths were brought back and restored. So this is really part 2 of this study in Daniel 8. We'll probably have that out in a week or so. So please stay tuned, subscribe, and be ready when that video is posted. Getting back to Desmond Ford, the preterist view that the time prophecies in this chapter in Daniel 8 all took place during the time of Antiochus Epiphanes makes no biblical or historical sense and must be relegated to the scrap heap of private, uninspired human interpretations. I don't care how many PhDs they have, how many commentaries, how well they claim to understand Greek and Hebrew. They're off the boat. They're in the ditch because they add the word sacrifice and they try to interpret that when it doesn't belong to the text. and it leads them right into the ditch. And thou shalt eat it as barley cakes, and thou shalt bake it with dung that cometh out of a man in their sight. Ezekiel 4, verse 12. This is talking about spiritual food baked over the dung that comes out of man. I mean, this is repulsive thought, but it's really a symbol of uninspired private teachings. And that's what you get from the preterists and their protege, Desmond Ford, who came in with the specific purpose to undermine the Adventist doctrine of the investigated judgment and our understanding and prophecy in Daniel 8 and elsewhere. So this is why it's a serious deal. We're here to uphold and defend Bible truth, and we will continue on with this series. So if you want to know, probably itching in your mind, where did you get this from? Well, we didn't make this up, and this is a source material. It comes from a message, powerful message, revival and reformation that entered Seventh-day Adventist Church in 1930. Daniel 8 was first covered in a book published in 1932, Shepherd's Rod, Volume 2, pages 126 to 147. A track number 3, pages 5 to 54, and a Timely Greetings, Volume 2, number 33, a sermon address first given in 1948 by Victor V.T. Houteff. Now, if you would like copies of this material, please contact us. We've got an email or WhatsApp at the end of the next slide. You can contact us. We will send you digital editions of any of this and even print copies if you're interested. So you can go prove all things and despise not prophesying, but prove all things, hold fast to that which is good, and see what is so. This concludes our presentation. If you have any further questions, comments on this subject, or please subscribe to this YouTube channel, Present Truth Studies, for future updates and videos as I promised, or request copies of the study outlines or track literature related to topics discussed in this video, then feel free to contact us anytime. Here's our email. You can connect us with this phone, text, or we're active on WhatsApp with this number, or you can visit one of our websites, shepherds-rod-speaks.org. We appreciate your time for paying attention, because this is essential truth. This is the key to defend the central pillar of the Advent faith, the investigative judgment, and understand all of the prophecies in Daniel 8, including the most critical doctrine of the daily and the truth of the sanctuary that was trodden underfoot by this exceeding great horn, and how God has brought it back. So stay tuned for our next video. We'll prove the time prophecies that confirm that. We thank you for your time, for your attention, and may God richly bless your search for truth as for hidden treasure, and to see from man whose breath is in his nostrils. Godspeed.